Hey, the doctor's on the mic for Playing the Player Part 2. Bing, 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 bing. Jiggy in the house for Playing the Player Part 2. Today we'll be dealing with a spot. It'll be 200 big blinds deep. That kind of spot that will arise pretty often, especially if you're playing on full tilt, deep tables. And it's kind of spot that, no matter who I'm talking to, they pretty much all have some problems dealing with it. And that's a perfect example of how you have to adapt your play here. Again, like to who you're playing with, who you're playing against, and we'll be looking at some examples of certain type of opponents and certain type of boards where your play will change. So let's get to the end right now. So you get dealt kings in small blind, and now we'll be playing against fish for the first time. We'll be looking at different opponents during the video, but for now it will be fish. And here is 35 standard raise. We get kings in small blind, so obviously we're gonna repop that to 125. And someone folds on the button, someone else folds on the big blind, and he calls in position. Flop comes Queen 9-5 with a flush draw. We don't have the back door. I think nobody here will argue against me that this is a pretty easy bet. Normally my standard would be to bet like something like close to half the pot against most opponents, because since you are repopping and then c-betting like a big part of your range that you are repopping, you want to like keep your bluffs pretty cheap and against an observing opponents most of the time. Even if you have a big end, you can't like go ahead and bet your big ends pretty big and then bet your bluffs pretty small, because this will be transparent of course. But here against the fish, you don't have to balance that. Here I'm talking about kind of mistake that a lot of players do, and it is to overevaluate like the power of like the thinking of opponents, like fish push here, who's like, let's say standard passive fish. A lot of players have like are maybe 8-10 tabling, and they're like playing their standard and they're like repopping their standard amount and then c-betting their standard amount like pretty much every time, like 100% of time, no matter what they have and no matter who they're playing against. That's a pretty bad mistake, especially in this type of spot against that opponent. The guy here, the fish, probably doesn't even care how much you bet. He's gonna call the flop if he has a hand to call the flop, like pair or draw or something like that. He's gonna raise if he has a hand to raise, and he's gonna fold if he has nothing, no matter how you bet, except if you bet like something completely absurd, like I don't know, like 50 or 487 or whatever. But here, if you bet like anything between maybe 150 and 220, his play won't ever change, because he doesn't even know what's your standard continuation bet. Here is like I was saying, most of the time I advocate like a smaller continuation bet size against most observing opponents when you are in 3-bet pot. But here against a fish, since you are playing for value, you don't even have to like balance your bet sizing. So we go ahead and bet pretty big and bet $200. So you bet, and guess what? The fish called. And guess what? The turn is the flush card. So here, your first reaction, no matter who you're playing against, is like, fuck my life. How am I gonna play that with 660 in the pot and 1,600 left behind and overpair and the flush got there, etc., etc. And that is why I'm here, to tell you how to play that. So yep, first we'll be dealing against the fish in that type of spot. Basically against let's say this is one pretty passive fish, like the standard fish. Of course, there are a lot of type of fishes, and some fishes will like bluff their stack no matter what, and some fishes will, I don't know, they'll be scared if you bet it when they have to pair, whatever. But let's say that this is standard passive fish who will pretty much never fold top pair unless like there's too much aggression. Plus, they pretty much never ever raise bluff. They don't know that type of play. Like they know the bluff, but they don't know how to raise bluff. Like you bet and they raise for bluff. Most of the fishes never ever even try that. Most of the passive fishes. So yeah, let's say this one is a pretty standard. Let's I don't know, 50-20 passive fish that you will be running a lot into at any stakes. Actually, there are a lot of them everywhere, especially in the World Series of Poker that I'm in right now in Vegas. I'm Vegas right now. I just wanted to plug that. But yeah, like everyone is that fish fush live documents. Anyway, that's another subject. Like I said, let's say this type of fish is the type to pretty much never ever fold up pair unless you give them a big reason to, and they pretty much never ever bluff raise. So first, I do think you don't want to check that turn because if they bet, you'll be in a pretty tough spot. You'll be pretty lost. I mean, they could have pretty much anything if you check. They could like have a straight draw on the turn that they're turning to bluff, but you don't, most of the time you don't even know if they're capable of doing that. They could have flush. Most of the time they won't have like a pair. Or they could have a pair of queens and think this is nuts or whatever. So yeah, against the type of fish that I was talking about, the best place certainly to bet. Of course, you do have to get a good read on your fishes to like get the read that I'm talking about, get the exact read I'm talking about. Most of them are like that, but still you want to be observant before the end and take good read and stuff. But here, let's say he's a fish that I'm talking about. So you do want to go ahead and bet, so we can call with like all his pairs plus flush draw. Let's say something like Queen Jack, Jack of Spades, even Queen Jack with no spades is gonna be calling something with like 9-8, 8 of spades. He's gonna be calling that turn for sure. So you're pretty much betting for value. But if he raises you on that turn, you're done with the end. Because like I said, most of these fishes don't even think about bluff raising. If you check, they'll be thinking about bluffing. But if you bet, the bluff raise is not in their repertoire of plays. But you do not want to give them a good reason to fold their pair plus flush draw or let's say just top pair type of hands until the river. So my standard play here against the fish will be to bet small turn plus bet small river. As you see here, I already have a plan for the river. Like if a break comes, of course I'm gonna be adjusting if some tricky card comes, but that's kind of spot that you do have to plan in advance. Something like I'm gonna bet the turn and check fold the river, stuff like that. But you want to be thinking in advance of what your best plan is going to be against pretty much all opponents. So here I'm gonna be looking, like I said, to bet river for value because he's gonna call with pretty much all his pairs on turn, pairs plus flush draws, even like only draws like I don't know Jack 10, any Jack 10 or like King Jack with a spade or stuff like that. So you have a lot of value on the turn. So you do go ahead and bet on the turn. You bet pretty small actually. That's another thing I want to talk about. Maybe even the most important thing that you think about against that fish is that you don't want to bet like too big on turn and then on the river because you'll be giving them a good reason to fold. Like I said, he is not looking to fold any top pair, any like middle pair even, unless you give him a good reason. And sorry for that. Even though he's pretty brain dead, uh, let's say he's not a complete brain dead moron type of player. Let's say he still think uh, like a little bit at least. Like it's not the worst fish you've ever seen. Like just a standard fish. If you three bet pre-flop, bet pot on the flop, bet pot on the turn, and then bet pot on the river, or whatever, he will fold his queen jack or his 9-10 or something like that before the river. Like he's not that stupid. He's gonna be scared of aces. Like when you reap up, the only thing that crosses his mind is like, okay, he either has ace king or aces, and when you bet pot, he's like, okay, he has aces, I'm gonna fold everything else. So like I said, you don't want to give him a good reason to fold, but you still want to give him a good reason to like call down. And if you give him good odds, no matter like what the board comes or whatever, he's gonna call you with a pair most of the time. So yeah, you bet pretty small on the turn because you don't want to scare him away with all the ends that you're beating, stuff like queens and nines, like pair of queen, pair of nines, and stuff like that. And you don't want to like bet the pot and then he shoves, and then you have good odds, and then most of the time he has a flush when he shoves, and you're pretty screwed when he bet pot and then he plays back at you. So yeah, you want to keep the betting pretty small so he keeps getting curious with most of his mill like like semi-weak holdings. So now you're on the river. He called you on the turn. If he raised you on the turn, you're out of here because of the reason I told you. Because when these type of players raise, it probably have nuts anyway. So you're now on the river. A river comes a break, total break, let's say. And he has 1.4k, and there's like 1.2k in the pot. Uh, some mistake. A lot of players here will do a pretty bad mistake, in my opinion, and that is to go ahead and shove for the entire pot size. I mean, against if you have a good read, and that's the point of that video actually. And if you do have a good read that the guy is gonna call you with any pair, then go ahead and shove the pot. I mean, if he's a really big fish, go ahead and shove the entire pot. He's gonna call you with any pair, and you just value down him. But here, uh, I can't give you examples against like all types of fishes and against all particular players. But let's say he's a pretty regular fish. Let's say if you shove the pot here, there, in my mind, there is no way he's gonna call you with worse because he's gonna be scary. He's just gonna be scary. He doesn't want like even those fishers. They want to have fun. They unless he steals it or whatever. They don't want to spend like 200 big blinds calling with one pair and running two aces because they're gonna be scared. You don't want to scare him away. So what you'll be looking at is a bet small on turn, then bet smaller on the river. So you keep him with that line, you keep him pretty straightforward in his betting. Like you don't check and then don't know what to do. You want to keep the lead against these guys, and you keep him like pretty honest with that, and uh, you keep him like calling any pair, any whatever. He's gonna call down you if you bet pretty small on turn in the river. He's gonna call you with any pair, like any pair queen nines. He's gonna call you with 10 jacks, even maybe eights sometimes when you bet really small, and you just save yourself money when you're beat because you could be beat here with the flush turning. So you go ahead and bet small turn, like I said, and then you bet small the river. So you bet 333 or like anything between 300 and let's say 500 depending on the player, and he calls you with anything actually that you beat. And you rake in a nice putt without much trouble. You didn't risk your whole 200 big blind stack, and you made him call down with pretty much any single pair that he had on the flop, any single piece of the board or whatever. If he goes ahead and shove the river, you like once again, that's a lot relative to what your read is on the player. If you think that he's gonna maybe shove a missed on the river, something like any Jack 10 or King Jack with a spade or stuff like that, then you could be bet calling that river since you're betting pretty small. But against most of the fishes, like against that particular fish that I'm talking about, then you're gonna be bet folding that river because he's only gonna shove you flush on the river. So you keep the job pretty easy because that's what you want to do out of position, 200 big blinds deep. You don't want to put yourself in a big guessing spot, so you keep things pretty easy and you rake in a nice spot against pretty much anything. So that's it for the first opponent. Now, hand number 2, example number 2, same hand actually, you will be playing against a tagfish. The difference between like the big fish and the tagfish, and you do have to differentiate these two type of players a lot, because especially at small and mid stakes, they're like the two most present type of players that you're going to be playing against, and you want to differentiate these two types of player a lot. The tagfish is pretty bad, but he is an observant opponent. It's like he catches up something and he understands most basic stuff about poker, and he does most of the time think when playing a hand, or he has like a, let's say, an autopilot mode that is still like pretty basic but still pretty good, better than the fish. So yeah, he's gonna be catching up things and he's gonna be pretty observant. So he raises, someone folds on the button, and you go ahead and 3-bet that. Sometimes you want to be cold calling against these type of players, but not often, let's say. Most of the time you're going to be re-raising, and flop comes the same thing. Here, first difference that you will be looking at between the tagfish and the big fish is that you do want to balance your bet sizing on the flop here against the tagfish. Even though he's not that good, let's say he's a good tagfish. Like, I do realize while speaking that I can make like 2,000 examples of the same hand in that particular series, because every opponent is different, and that's the point of the whole series, is that you have to adjust to your opponent and you have to be playing like the same hand very differently against everyone, because no one's gonna react the same to anything that you do. So yeah, let's say this one tagfish is like a pretty good tagfish. He's pretty observant. He thinks while he plays, but he does not arrive to the good conclusion all the time. And I think that's a great example of a lot of tagfishes. So yeah, like I said, since this opponent is pretty observant, and you do want to be balancing your bet sizing, like not only betting big with your big hands and betting small with your bluffs, because that will be too transparent, you go ahead and bet, let's say, your standard continuation bet in 3-bet button, that kind of spot, and mine would be something around like 150, or like, let's say, between 130 and 180, like half to a third of the pot. I think that's the best option, because that will be the thing that will give you the most options on the turn and river in 3-bet, but especially out of position. You don't want to bet too big against observant opponents. So yeah, you go ahead and bet 150, because you would do that with like almost your entire range against that type of player, actually, because he's gonna be folding a lot on the flop, and he goes ahead and call, and the flush is again on turn. So yeah, first difference between the fish and tagfish is that you balance your sibling size on the flop, because he is pretty observant. And the second difference here is that you want to be balancing your turn bet size. I mean, you could go ahead and check that turn, but I think it's a pretty bad like mistake against that type of player, particularly because first, you do not want to give them a free card. Second, you allow him to like pot control, take a free card with a lot of his holdings, like Queen Jack or 9-10 holdings. talking a lot about, and you're allowing him to like try to fire a big bluff, but since he's not firing that big bluff like pretty often, you don't know if you have to check call, or check fold or whatever. So you want to keep him pretty straightforward, but still you want to bet not so small that you look so transparent, then it's gonna bluff raise you, because that one is most of the time capable of bluff raising you if you give him a pretty big opportunity. So once again, you want to be like two barreling your, let's say, standard two barreling amount, and I think that this will keep him pretty straightforward in the end, because once again, that is the type of spot that you don't want to get too tricky with 200 big blinds deep with a, let's say, vulnerable, and you don't want to put yourself into too much of a guessing spot here, because that, like, unless you're like 100% sure of what you're doing, you are going to be wrong a lot of times, and it's going to cost you money. So you go ahead and two barrel your standard amount, whatever your that amount is. Once again, that amount for me is close to like half the pot, between half the pot and 2/3 of the pot in a 3-bet pot. Those are my standard barreling sizes. Even 200 big blinds deep, I think those are the best sizes. That could be another subject for another video, but those are the sizes that give you the most options, no matter what comes up. So you go ahead and bet your standard amount. Here, if he raises you, unless you have some read that he is capable of, let's say, bluff raising you here with some kind of combo draw, you do want to go ahead and fold, unless you have some read, like I said, because most of these tag fishes, like the big fishes, don't even think about bluff raising, like, ever. But if you do have a read, like, you can go ahead and call, but most of the time you want to be bet folding that turn. So the river comes, biggest break in the deck. Once again here, the tag fish, and that is a similarity between him and the big fish. He is not going to be willing to put 200 big blinds with only one pair like ace, queen, or king. Maybe ace, queen, but then again, he's going to find a fold most of the time, because most of them are just scared to play 200 big blinds deep when they do find themselves 200 big blinds deep. You don't want to be shoving here, because in my opinion, trust me, it's pretty good. You're going to get called by better hands, and you're gonna be folding his worse hands, like always, if you do shove here. But I'm hearing you asking, hey Jiggy, if we do not shove, what do we do? I could see a point in check calling if you think that he will like always check back his semi-weak made hands, and like he is always gonna like be betting his misdraws, and you'd think he would be like shoving a flush every time on the turn, so you could be check calling. But then checking, I think, is going to put you in a pretty bad spot, because I think a lot of opponents are going to like be slow playing either a set on the flop or a flush on the turn a lot, even this spot. So you don't want to be check calling too often, because that puts you in a pretty bad spot, and you don't want to be shoving, like I said. So what is left? What is left is something that I think a lot of people don't, and that's another pretty bad mistake, a lot of people don't even consider making, and that is like the blocking bet on that type of river against that type of opponent. You want to get some value out of his made hands. Something like, I don't know, jacks with a spade, queen jack with a spade, stuff like that, that he is always calling a turn with. And or king queen or ace queen, and you don't want to be bluffed out of your hand if you check. But here again, it's going to depend on your read, and it's all going to depend on how well you can get reads on people. But let's say that this tag fish, you had a pretty good read that he won't like bluff raise you on that river, because once again, most of these tag fishes won't ever bluff raise you. So what you want to be doing is you don't want to check because you don't know if you have to call or fold if you check, and you don't want to shove because you're pretty much never ever get called by worse. So you want to bet pretty small so you get value out of any pair actually because he's like, fuck it, 200, but 1,200 I'll call. And this is pretty free, easy money that I think a lot of you guys like, and even me a lot. And that is, I think, to be honest, one of personally one of the indicators when I'm playing a session on whether I'm playing well or not is that I think about doing these bets. When I'm playing well, I am varying my bet sizes a lot, and I'd be doing that against player like that I think he's gonna bluff raise me on that river with pretty much anything because he thinks that I can't ever call when I bet 200. I'm gonna be doing that with like nut flush or set or whatever a lot to call the shove. And against players who don't ever bluff raise me, I'm gonna be doing these kind of bets to get value from some weird weaker hands. When I'm playing well, I am doing these type of bets, and that is something you want to incorporate in your game, guys, because that makes you so much tougher to play against, and that is so like free, easy money that you get that most of you are gonna like pass because you're gonna be like checking this river because like you're like, oh, I don't want to shove, I'm gonna check. You don't even consider the small bit. So yeah, you want to be considering these small bits in that type of spot. That is not the only spot that you want to be doing that. There is a lot of type of spots. If you want other examples of that, just like give me a shout. I'm gonna give you some. But yeah, you bet 200, let's say, and let's say you goes ahead and call because that's what's gonna happen most of the time when you do bet 200 on that river against a tagfish. And he calls with, let's say, pocket tens with a ten of spades because that is exactly how he would have played that hand from pre-flop to the river when you bet when you size your bets like that. So yeah, right now we've looked at two hands. We took pretty much the same line against the big fish and the tag fish, but we did vary our bet size because we wanted to look like some different hands depending on how the player is thinking about what he is thinking about during the end. So let's get to the third example. Right now we've looked at two hands that we're playing against opponents that don't pay too much attention to what your own image is. But now the next two hands are going to be against the same player, but this is going to be a very good player. And what is going to change in those two hands is your own image, how that good player perceives you. Here, that player will be, his name is Good Lose Goose, and he will be, let's say, me, because I am that type of player, or Samuelius with that same kind of player, a Good Lose Goose, or let's say someone like, I don't know if you know him, like 20 bucks pin, or like even Dur, but you're not even gonna play ever against Dur. But whatever good lose, quote unquote, capable of making big plays type of player, someone that you know at your limit who is capable of doing that. So he is gonna be that player. First example against that player, you are Jiggy the Tag. What you have is an image of a regular tag nit, maybe even tag fish. Let's say you have all the reasons in the world to believe that the Good Loose Goose perceives you as a pretty very standard multi-tabling reg, that he doesn't have big read on you, and he just assumes that, like I said, you're a multi-tabling reg, multi-tabling tag fish, tag net, or whatever. You are gonna be having that image for that hand. And this is a spot that is going to rise a lot against good players who don't estimate their opponents, that they don't know much about. very well. For the good loose goose, raising on the cutoff, you decide to go ahead and 3-bet your kings on the small line, someone falls on the button, someone else falls on the big blind. I'm never gonna get tired of that joke. Seriously. And flop comes queen 9-5 surprise with a flush draw. And you have no repair, no backdoor, and you decide to go ahead and make your standard play here. What is gonna rise most often, and bet your standard continuation bet because he is a thinking, observing opponent. So you go ahead and bet 150 into 260, and he calls you. Yeah, like he could be raising you, but here we're looking at when he calls you, that type of spot. And the flush comes on the turn. And now you have to give yourself a plan for the next two streets, because you don't want to like check and be like, oh, I'm gonna check and do whatever, or I'm gonna bet and I don't know what to do after that. That's a type of thing that you don't want to do, guys. So you want to give yourself a plan. Before giving yourself a plan, you want to think how the guy's gonna be thinking about the end against like all of his holdings. With all of his holdings, actually. First, let's say he has something like ace queen or king queen, queen jack, queen 10, 9-10, 9 jack, or something like that. And most importantly, you have a tag image, an image of someone who is not too aggressive, too Mongol, someone pretty straightforward, a straightforward tag. You have to realize here, when you have that type of image, that you do not have two streets of value against a good opponent on that type of board when you have a tag image. You can have those two streets of value if you have very loose image against that opponent, against hands that I just talked about. But with that tag image, he is going to either find a fold on turn or the river, most of the time 200 big blinds deep. He's not going to call off his stack against a straightforward tag opponent on that type of board, 200 big blinds deep. So first, you do realize that you do not have two streets of value against weaker made hands. Second, you want to think about what he is going to be doing with like if you bet with like big hands and big draws. And the answer to that is he's going to make your life pretty hard. Like he's going to have good balance of either he flop the set or he turn the flush. If you bet, most of the time he's going to balance his like shoves and slow plays pretty well, and you're going to be pretty bad spot if you go ahead and bet the turn and like then you check the river and he shoves, or you don't know if you have to bet the river pretty small, and that's something that's kind of out of your arsenal that was in your arsenal against like a weaker player, because you were not really afraid of a bluff raise, but now you are afraid of bluff raise. But then again, he could have a big end, stuff like that, etc., etc. You know what I'm getting to. So that pretty much comes to what I was explaining earlier. And in that kind of spot, 200 big blind deep, you want to keep yourself. You want to play the hand like the easiest way and the simplest way possible. You don't want to be putting yourself into a big guessing spot that you don't have a clue if you have to call, you have to fold, or whatever. So you have to put yourself in your opponent's shoes here, the good loose goose, and think about what he is going to be doing with a lot of his holdings here. Here I will be looking to check, because first, like I said, against like his mediocre type of made hands, you don't have two streets of value when you have tag image here. So when you bet the turn, you just make your life very uncomfortable, because you're going to get shoved by some type of anything, because he's going to be making plays and he knows that he could be representing flush very well here, and he could be trying to make you fold like an overpair, even like especially when you're 200 big blind deep. So you don't want to go ahead and bet because, like I said, you're gonna make your life pretty miserable when you do go ahead and bet. So yeah, like I said, if he has some kind of mediocre maiden, you only have like one street of value left. So you will be looking at taking that street of value most of the time on the river if the turn goes like check check. If he has a flush, I'll tell you now, you're probably screwed. Uh, since he is a pretty tough opponent, he's gonna be like balancing his range of like semi bluff and bluffs and having a flush and having a set and stuff like that pretty well. And he's gonna be tough to play against. Like I said, you're pretty much screwed if he has a flush. So like if you bet, you're screwed because you probably have to call a shove because it could be like semi bluffing on a shove. So your only option here, I think, is to check, and that is to check to induce. But, and that is a very important point, when you check to induce against that good of an opponent, you want to be ready to go all the way with your hand here most of the time, unless like the jack of spades come on that river. You can find a fold, obviously, if you bets again. But against good opponents here, if you put yourself in a good opponent's shoe, like when you check and he bets, he's gonna be betting, in my opinion, like all of his straight draws because that board specifically is pretty particular because it has a lot of straight draws on it, like any 6-7, 6-8, 7-8, Jack 10, King Jack, King 10, Jack 8, anything like that suited 200 big blinds deep in position. He's gonna call that pre-flop 100% of the time. And when you check to him on the turn, he knows that most of the time against a tag opponent, he is gonna be able to make you fold all of your range when you check the turn with two barrels here. And you know that he's not stupid enough to like fire the turn and then shut down the river because he knows that most of the tags here are gonna check all the turn and then like check the river and the guy shoves like, oh, you must have flush and then you fold. That is the very worst line you can take here against a very good opponent. That and the like I'm checking the turn, he could be bluffing, and then he bets the turn, you're like, oh, draws a string, yeah, you shove. That's even worse. And that is kind of mistake that I see a lot of players doing, especially against aggressive opponents, and like, people are saving me thousands of money every day doing that, like, they decide to, let's say, go ahead and like, slow play a set, and like, they slow play the flop, and then slow play, like they check the turn, and I bet, and they're like, oh, draws are coming, and I'm afraid, and they end up check shoving turn in spot where it's like super obvious that I'm three barreling like 100% of my bluffs, and they just like save me thousands of money, like being scared on the turn, like check shoving because they're scared of draws. You don't want to go ahead and do that, guys. You do want to, when you are slow playing against a very good opponent that is capable of doing big bluffs on the river, and that is important. And listen, guys, you want to give him an opportunity to bluff his whole stack. Give him that opportunity, please, 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 against aggressive opponents, guys. Just do it. Just don't cut him his options of barreling off, and then you only end up getting called by a better hand, and like, sometimes you're going to check shove turn and he's going to fold, but you miss so much value against all of his bluffs in spot that it's so obvious that the good opponent is going to fire his whole stack as a bluff because, well, he has to, and that is the best play and he knows it. You either check fold the turn if you don't want to go all the way with your hand, or you want to check all turn, check all river. Against like a weaker opponent, you could make a point for like check calling turn, check folding the river if you don't think he's following up with his bluffs on the river when he does go ahead and bluff the turn. But against a very good opponent, I tell you now, guys, he is intelligent enough to know that if he wants to make you fold most of your range when you have a tag image, he has to bet both turn and river. So when you check call the turn, you do have to go ahead and check call the river. So like I said, we came to the conclusion that check calling both street is the best way to make money here, because lots of time, like, I mean, that turn is gonna go like check check, and then you can value bet the river for value on like most bricks, and you're gonna get called pretty often from any queen, stuff like that. Uh, but when he does happen to bet, like I said, you have to make a decision right now on the turn whether you want to go all the way with your end, because you know that he's gonna follow up his bluffs on the river. That is not true with all the opponents. Like I said, that is only true against a very good player here, and that is who we are dealing against here. So we go ahead and check, and in that situation, he goes ahead and bet 350. And like I said, we are nowhere close to folding that because of that particular board. Like I said, that there are going to be a lot of straight draws missed. He's going to have, like, I don't know, King Jack with the backdoor, King Jack suit and hearts and stuff like that, like, so often. And for him, this is with like 200 big blinds. This is like the perfect two-barrel turn river situation ever when the flush happens. That the good player is gonna two-barrel the stack like pretty much always, unless he has a good reason to believe that you are slow playing him. He's gonna fire his turn river like always here. Personally, I always fire turn river here against a tag opponent because most of the time they fold, and that is the mistake. Like, they fold like on the river if they're calling turn, and that is the mistake that I want you guys to avoid. So you go ahead and call turn, and then the river breaks again, and you check call again. Here, to be honest, guy, I tried to make a poker stuff of like a range of what he's calling the flop with, and then what he is going to be betting both turn and river either as a bluff or as a big made hand for value. And I realized that I completely suck at poker stuff, and I never used that stupid software, so I don't have a clue on how it works. So I realized that it was pretty much useless. But I tried to, and it gets like most of its ranges that I was coming up with, because I think that is not a complete analysis with poker stuff, because like depending on the flow of the game or whatever, it could be like turning pocket eights into bluff on both turn and river, but sometimes he's not going to, and etc. etc. So, but yeah, against I had a pretty good range here, like what was this? Like any set, any flush, and then any like gutter and backdoor, or gutter on the flop or whatever. Like, I ran a couple of possible ranges that he is going to be betting both turn and river either as a bluff or as value, and I was like 50-50 with your hand, with your pocket kings here most of the time. Which makes a check call a very good situation with all the money that was already in the pot. Actually, guys, I just remembered. I'm just adding that afterwards. That my stove that I showed you, was like my most pessimistic one. But I forgot like all the 8-7, 8-6, 8-6, and 6-7 type of hands that he's gonna have a lot. So you have all the reasons to believe that you have more than 50% here of equity against the range that is both betting turn and river. So yeah, maybe like you have like 55 between. My guess would be, if we go in like a more optimistic range, you can go up to 60-65%, and against the most pessimistic range, you can go down to like 40-45%. So depending on what is your exact reading against your opponent. But yeah, most of the time against the opponent that I'm describing, I think it's going to turn around 55%, maybe 60% most of the time. So yeah, you go ahead and check the river again. And obviously, he shoved the river, because he's shoving the river, to be honest. When he's betting the turn, he's shoving the river with seriously 100% of his range. A good player here. You don't want to be checked. I'm repeating myself, but you don't want to be check calling turn, check folding the river, because he's gonna be shoving the river like 120% of the time here, and that is the biggest trap that you can fall into against good players. Like, oh, I'm gonna like be scared on the river. I'm gonna check all the turns, see another card, and then I'm gonna be scared on the river. You don't want to go ahead and do that. You can do that against weaker opponents, like I told you earlier, but against these good opponents, you want it. Check out, and be ready to go with your read. So you do go ahead and check out, and that time he shows you like the gutter ball on the flop with the backdoor flush draw. And I swear to God, he's gonna play that hand exactly like that, guys. If you don't believe me, don't believe me. He's gonna play that hand. The good opponent, the good aggressive opponent is gonna play that hand exactly like that. Of course, he's gonna play a set like that. Of course, he's gonna be playing a flush like that. But check calling both turn and river on that board with that image, with tag image, is certainly the best play you can do, because no matter what you do, like I understand that you don't want to be check calling F 200 big blinds deep on a flush board and 3-bet pot, etc. But when that turn falls, no matter what you do, your life is gonna like suck. But that is the best way to take the line that your life is not gonna suck against that kind of player. You keep things pretty simple, and you get value from worse hands, and you give yourself a chance to completely pound the good player. You use your image actually to like make him believe that you could fold a river when you really are not ready to fold a river against a good, capable of making moves of two barring stuff, capable of bluffing F 200 big blinds deep player, and those players are most frequent these days. So, yep, that was it. Next hand against the same player but with another image. Like I said, fourth hand against the same player, but now you have a better image, like an image of most aggressive opponent. Aggressive, capable of barring his whole section with big blind deep. A very good player. I called him that time the real Jiggy. The kind of image I'm gonna be having, and the kind of image that I want you guys to be having if you are watching my video. So yeah, the same good loose goose in here raises against in the cutoff, and we find king in the small line, and we 3-bet him. Bing. And someone else folds in the big blind. And he calls. And the flop comes the same. And of course, once again, you do go ahead. And let's say you did not decide to play this hand tricky to like balance around, yada yada yada. You go ahead and bet the flop. And he calls the flop. Yep. And the flush comes on the turn. Okay, here, what is gonna change between the example in hand 3 and the example in hand 4 right now? And I will tell you what is gonna change is that now the most important thing is that you do happen to have two streets of value against like a whole lot, pretty much all of his like medium, not all, but most of the time against a whole lot of his like medium strength, mediocre hands. Something like I said, ace queen, king queen, queen jack, queen 10, 9 10, 9 jack, pocket 10s here. You are gonna have two streets of value on both turn and river a lot. Why? Because he knows that you are gonna be firing your whole stack as a bluff here most of the time with the image that you have. But okay, that is one pretty important thing, guys, to be aware of, and that is to understand exactly what the kind of image you are projecting. Like bluffing your whole stack once, 200 big blinds deep, doesn't mean that you are gonna be having the kind of image that I'm talking about here, and the kind of image that the guy is gonna assume that you are gonna be firing your whole stack 200 big blinds deep pretty much every time in that spot. Here I am dealing kind of spot against a regular that knows you pretty well, and you do have a very aggressive image like I do, where the guy knows that on that turn you are going to be two-barreling like anything that has equity, like any ace of spades, any like king, jack, king 10, Jack 10, Jack 8, Jack 9 with one spade, 6, 7, 6, 8, 8, 7 with one spade. Like, of course, they're going to be battering a flush and a big hand and whatever, but there are so many hands, and that is kind of in line with, I don't know if you guys saw the first Phil Galfan's first episode of Philosophy, where he is like calling down both turn and river on a very like scary and dry board because he knows that his opponent has a whole lot of like backdoor draws, some kind of gut shots and stuff like that in his hand, and he knows that his opponent is good enough to fire both turn and river in that kind of spot with these hands. So he calls down with like a mediocre pair, and he ends up being right because the opponent was, like I said, barreling both turn and river with a backdoor draw. So when you do happen to have the image that Phil was like talking about in that video, if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's like worth $100,000 maybe. That video was nuts. But yeah, when you do happen to have that image, the image of type of guy that your opponent knows your opponent is good, here again, he's the good loose goose, and he knows that you are another good loose goose, and you are barreling off 200 big blinds deep, always here, always on turn and river. And to be honest, I call this guy the real Jiggy because myself, I am going to be barreling like, I don't know, king jack with jack spades or ace, whatever, with the ace of spades, every single time here, both turn and river, because most of my opponents, to be honest, are going to be either folding or on the turn or the river with like 80% of their holdings except for flushes or sets most of the time. But when you do get a pretty big read that your opponent is one capable of calling down 200 big blinds deep when he has pretty strong read, and he thinks that you're weak, etc., etc., and he knows that he thinks that you're capable of doing these big bluffs, then what you have left to do here, to be honest, is bet and bet. If you bet the turn and get raised, it's a guessing game. It's still a guessing game. Like, exactly the guessing game that I was talking about in the exact same hand one hand ago when you had tag image. It is going to be a pretty bad spot. But the truth is, like, you will want to have a more precise read to decide whether you want to call or fold the turn. But like I said, the truth is, he is going to call the turn with like 90% of his holdings. Like, he's going to either be slow playing or trying to call down your bluffs, or he's going to have some kind of weird draw or whatever most of the time. So he's going to be calling turn most of the time. So you want to go ahead and bet the turn because, like I said, against all of his like medium strength maidens, and that is like a whole big part of his range. And that is a big difference between the earlier hand when you had tag image, now you have an aggressive image. I mean, in the earlier hand, you do not have two streets of value just because of your image. Now you do have those two streets of value against that good opponent. So you want to be making him pay for, like, with all his, like I said, medium strength type of hands. So you're going to bet both turn and river instead of, like, checking the turn, hoping that the turn goes check, and then, like, betting the river for value. You want to be betting turn and then betting a river, something that you couldn't do when you had a much like weaker image. So like I said, you go ahead and bet the turn. He calls. River comes a break again. You shut the river. And he calls with, that time he calls with, what I made him call with like tens. He's going to make those big calls because those calls are going to be good a lot. Because yeah, I'm going to be barreling that turn, but you have to want to, you want to have like the good meta game, the good flow, the good, like, you want to be right on your reads to make that type of play. Don't go ahead and try to get that type of thin value against any regular, thinking that, oh, we know that I'm aggressive and I'm going to be like shoving 1,000 big blinds for a thin value because he's gonna call down. You want to have some big precise reads on both like your opponents and how your opponents see you. But when you do have that, what I wanted to show you actually, guys, is that against very good players, against like not so good players, like the type of players that was in the N1 and N2, your image is not that important. But against a very good player, against better player actually, your image is very more important, and that is gonna make deviate your type of play. Your lines on that type of spot a lot. Like your own image against good player is what is gonna decide on how you're gonna play like both turn and river.